Good afternoon, everyone. This is David Stearns with Haley Marketing, and welcome to today's Lunch with Haley webinar. Today, it is my pleasure to have a chance to review some of the very amazing information, exciting things that Ryan, Paula, and I learned at the 2019 Staffing Industry Executive Forum. And before we jump into the presentation, for everybody listening and watching the recorded version of today's webinar, a little confession. This is a re-recording of the first 25 minutes because we ran into some technical difficulties. So if you see or hear a little glitch about 25 minutes in, don't worry. We had a problem with the beginning of the original recording, so to make it good for you, we wanted to redo it. With that said, let's jump in and talk about some of the things that we learned at the Executive Forum. So it was a huge conference, no real surprise there. Tons of content, long days, lots of fun. And what we're going to try to do over the course of this webinar is give you a quick recap of as much as we could. Now, this is in total a little over an hour. I think it's about an hour and 20-minute recording. However, the Executive Forum is 3 days of content. Ryan and Paula and I went to as many sessions as we could, but we barely scratched the surface of the content that was there. So if you've never been to the Executive Forum, next year it's in Miami Beach, awesome location. Go to Staffing Industry's website, get some information about next year's Executive Forum, and spend spring break 2020 down in Miami with us, where we'll hear what's going on in the state of the industry a year from now. But for today, let's talk first about some of the keynote presentations. And every Staffing Industry Executive Forum kicks off with a presentation by Barry Asen, the president of SIA. And his talk is always about the state of and future of the industry. And the theme this year was about breakthrough leadership for today and tomorrow. So I'm going to just highlight some of the key statistics that Barry shared. First off is the staffing industry in the United States is approaching $150 billion in revenue. That's 3 times larger than it was in the 1990s. I think the first time we went to an executive forum, revenue for the industry was below 100 billion. This industry has just been skyrocketing in growth, and especially since the Great Recession has done really well. But don't get too confident for all of us Americans. We're only about 1/3 of the global market for staffing. Internationally, our industry is now almost a $500 billion a year business. So if you're not international, there may be opportunities for growth. If you're not international, watch out. There are international players who are looking to come to the United States, and we need to be aware of the industry and what the international players are doing, because it creates both opportunities and threats for domestic staffing companies. So, where's the money in staffing? Well, not surprisingly, the largest segment of the industry is light industrial staffing, representing almost 1/3, 27% of the total. And the forecast for this year is to grow by an additional 3%, which is about the average growth for the industry in its entirety. Immediately behind industrial staffing is IT staffing, representing 1/4, or 24% of the market, also forecast to grow 3%, which is a little slower than IT's been growing. Although I've talked to some of our IT staffing clients, and they said 3%, we're going to blow that out of the water. So it seems like there's lots of opportunities, particularly in the mid-sized companies, to really be growing IT staffing. The next largest segments, it's a tie between healthcare and office staffing, which are both at 13%. The good news for healthcare, it's going to grow above the average in the industry with 4% forecasted growth. But the downward trend in the use of administrative support continues, with a forecast this year of -1%. The only industry segment forecasted to go down. So if your business is office staffing, you really have to think about either A, how are we going to take more business away from competitors, or B, how are we going to broaden the types of support services we provide to our clients so that a -1% trend in the industry is not a -1% to our company. Next largest segments, engineering and finance, both at 7%, and like healthcare, faster growing than average, both growing at 4%. Life sciences, which didn't even exist a few years ago, is now up to 2% of the industry with 4% growth forecast. And then we've got some of the smaller segments that have been big enough to make the pie chart. Marketing and education staffing, so people like me and the team at Haley Marketing, and people that do substitute teachers, both now representing 1% of the $150 billion industry. But look at the growth rates. It's each at 7%, and they're smaller, but expected to be growing faster than any other segments of the staffing industry. And the Jeopardy potpourri, everything else is 5% of the industry. So lots of diversity in staffing. Industrial is doing well. In a little while, we're going to talk about recessions, which industrial tends to be really negatively impacted by. But wherever you are in the staffing industry, as you can see, SIA is saying, 2019 should be a pretty good year, but if you're looking for high single-digit or double-digit growth, you're going to need strategies for marketing, for selling, for recruiting to outperform your competitors. I know we've been talking to lots of companies that if they could fill all of their open job openings, they would increase revenues by 50, even 100%. And so there were not as many presentations as I expected at SIA on recruitment marketing. But if you're stuck with recruitment challenges, after you listen to this webcast, check out other back episodes of Lunch with Haley for some of our recruitment marketing best practices episodes. All right, so what could get in the way of the growth of the industry? Well, no surprise. Number one is skill shortages. And I mentioned, some companies could double their sales if they could just fill their open job orders. But what Barry said is that it's not as much a shortage of people as it is people in the wrong places. So there are segments of the country where there are actually abundance of workers, but there aren't jobs for those workers. There are workers that have the wrong skills for the jobs that are available. And there was a lot of talk throughout the conference on the subject of upskilling, and you'll see more of this even in Barry's presentation, as companies are getting more aggressive about manufacturing their own workers through training programs. To fill the skills gap, staffing companies are relying on two things. Number one, they're broadening their talent pool by looking at non-traditional sources of talent, whether that's trailing spouses, retirees, back to work programs for people coming out of prison. And as I mentioned, they're looking at doing free and even for-profit training programs. Now, I don't think anybody's going to be surprised that the SIA conference was filled with people talking about technology, artificial intelligence, automation, big data. And Barry talked about disruptive change. And I wanted to share this graph that Barry put up on the screen, and I loved the simplicity and elegance of this picture. So what it shows is how human beings think about the future, which tends to be kind of a relatively level line, versus how technology really impacts our lives. And right now, if you look at artificial intelligence, machine learning, we're all afraid of the Terminator coming to life, but we really have overestimated the impact of AI on our businesses. And we're envisioning that the machines can do a lot more than they really are capable of at this point in time. They're not really intelligent yet. They're mostly about crunching data, using algorithms to make decisions faster, just based on analyzing what happened in the past. But that's going to change. The machines are going to get smarter. They're going to start to be able to make decision making. They're actually going to become more empathetic, more human. And you're going to see a change where the green line overshoots our expectations, and that's where real disruption occurs. And many of the speakers at SIA said that could happen as soon as 5 years from now. But the longest anybody forecasts that happening is about 15 years from now. So as we look at robotics and automation, artificial intelligence, we're going to see major disruptions happening to the labor force, to the staffing industry within 5 to 15 years. You can see on screen, there were 4 areas of change that Barry talked about. The human cloud, meaning all of the online staffing companies where you think of Uber, where I need something done, I go and place an order, somebody comes right away and delivers the service. That's Uber. Well, that's also happening in industrial staffing right now. Some of the major traditional staffing companies have their own apps to do that. I saw a presentation by a company called Winolo that you'll hear more about later in this webinar, that we're able to do amazing things, to do 90% plus fills in 3 hours with a 2% no-show rate in industrial staffing. Pretty amazing. Process automation. If you look at all of the things that we do that are still manual labor in every step of talent acquisition, from sourcing, vetting talent, presenting candidates to clients, getting feedback, there's lots of opportunities to write software to automate those processes to make our businesses more efficient and make our service to our clients and candidates faster and even more enjoyable for the client and the candidate. Then there's artificial intelligence and robotics. As I mentioned, we're not at the tipping point yet where it's really changing the world, but it's pretty easy to see that smart systems, smart technology will be able to make decisions. I think Paula's going to talk about a presentation where she saw a statistic about how easy it is to automate most functions that don't require deep human thought today, and how we're getting to the point that they can automate things that do require deep human thought. And then there's the field of robotics. You know, everybody's seen the pictures of Boston Dynamics and their amazing robots doing incredible things. But you know, Amazon hired. There's an interesting slip. Amazon purchased more than 50,000 robots to automate warehouses. So if you're supplying warehouse workers and your clients are going to replace humans with robots, what's that going to do to your business, and how will you get ready for it? And then there are threats to the industry, and those robots are one of them. It's automation that's going to kill jobs. New entrants coming into the industry. That Winolo company is not a staffing company. They're a technology company. They're sort of in the day labor business, even though their CEO just viewed them as a tech company. The economy itself. We're overdue for a recession. As I mentioned, you're going to hear another presentation that was a keynote where it was forecast when the next recession is going to come. Of course, there's public perception. For whatever reason, the general population doesn't love our industry. They don't see us as job creators. They don't see us as vital matchmakers. They see us as reducing the quality of work because we take away benefits, we reduce wages. Now, everybody listening to this webinar knows that's not the reality of staffing, but if the world has the perception that staffing is bad, that leads to negative legislation, and you see in states like California, Massachusetts, New York, increasingly business unfriendly legislation against the staffing industry. And then lastly, there's complacency. If you've ever read the book Who Moved My Cheese, it tells the parable of two mice that are stuck in a maze, and one day they go to where the cheese normally is and it's moved. And the parable is, what do the mice decide to do? And one says, you know what, I know it's coming back, I'll wait. And the other said, there's not a chance, I'm going to go find it. And there's a lot of people that I'm seeing today watching the trends happening in the industry saying, well, I'll wait for those higher profit industrial jobs to come back. I'll wait for the client who switched to VMS to get sick of the VMS to come back. If you're not thinking about the evolution of your staffing company and how you're going to change how you provide services, where you provide services, how you automate your business, how you integrate technology into your delivery model, if you get complacent, you're going to be displaced by someone who is evolving. And that's a huge risk for many of the small to mid-sized staffing companies. There were a number of very large staffing companies talking about their investments in technology at the conference. And hands down, they're going to spend so much money, they're going to be hard to compete with from a tech perspective. So if you're a small to mid-sized staffing company, you're going to have to evolve in different ways. Sure, you're going to want to use technology to improve your service, but you're really going to want to look at the service itself and say, where can I crush a technology company? But I can't do it doing the exact same things I'm doing today. I have to find new ways to deliver service that's a combination of people, technology, and process. So if you're looking to grow, where are your opportunities? Well, there are a lot of good things going on, a lot of very positive trends for staffing. Number one is the growing acceptance of flexible work. Once upon a time when I started in the staffing industry eons ago, you taught people to understand what a temporary was and what the value of staffing was. Then staffing became sort of a everybody does it necessary evil. Over the course of the last 9 to 10 years, staffing has become strategic for most large employers. They actually look at contingent workforce planning as part of their overall workforce planning initiatives. And if companies are thinking more strategically about staffing, that gives you a seat at their table to help them better plan their future hiring needs and to be more of a partner in their business and less of just a who's got the lowest price vendor. Skill shortages, we don't love it when we can't fill a job order, but that's where demand for staffing comes from. That's where our value comes from, is being the best at sourcing specific types of people. Upskilling, I mentioned it once and you're going to hear it multiple times in today's webinar. Training people so that you're creating qualified workers, whether those are in the light industrial world, skilled trades world, all the way up to IT and healthcare. There are staffing companies providing really robust training programs so that they are both manufacturing talent they can place and creating new revenue centers from their training operations. Looking at new ways to solve market failures where supply doesn't equal demand. We're seeing a big growth in remote work. So what jobs are you staffing that maybe instead of focusing on a local workforce, you might work with your clients to focus on a global workforce. And now you can solve the market failures by finding a supply of talent where it's available and providing it to clients where they need it. Obviously, if I need someone to pack a box, I'm not doing that from the Philippines to a company in California. But if I need someone to do call center or basically any office work, any IT work, most engineering work, I could bring in qualified workers from anywhere on the planet to match supply to demand. Then there are growing in new markets. You saw a couple of them earlier, education, marketing. If you look at the fastest growing jobs, those will also become the fastest growing segments for staffing services. Technology, huge opportunity. How will you bring the online staffing model into your current business? How will you create new models for service delivery that don't involve the traditional salesperson goes out on a sales call, takes a job order, comes back to a recruiter goes to source, recruiter finds candidates, bring candidates in for interviewing, vets candidates, test candidates, then sends them out on an assignment. That's a very labor-intensive, very lengthy, time-consuming process. How will you use technology to reinvent your staffing business? And I mentioned already that clients are getting more sophisticated about staffing. So as it becomes more strategic to their businesses, as they get smarter about it, they need us to get smarter about it. Our salespeople have to be masters of the economics of staffing and understand how our business can help drive productivity, drive profitability, reduce costs throughout the organization, and enable companies to be more reactive, more adaptive, and capitalize on opportunities better by working with a staffing vendor. Our salespeople need to be able to sell all of that value when they're sitting down face-to-face with a client or a prospect. All right, and that were some of the highlights of Barry's presentation. As I said, he did an hour just on data about the industry, so I tried to highlight a few of the key points. But now we're going to transition to the second keynote presentation, best-selling author and sales guru, Daniel Pink. And Daniel's topic was on leadership and the new principles of influence, but he did this, he called it 2-3-4, two big ideas leading to ultimately 4 take-homes, and I'm going to recap his 2-3-4. And what Daniel's first big idea was that, like it or not, everybody's in sales. Now, I don't think anybody in the staffing industry is going to be surprised by that, but if you look at the picture at the bottom right, so Daniel's company did a survey of people to get their impressions of what it means to be in sales, and those aren't the most charming words you've ever seen. Pushy, annoying, difficult, hard, sleazy, yuck. Yeah, that's not exactly the words we want associated with our profession. But what Daniel's saying is, there isn't a person in the world who is not in a sales function. You may not be selling staffing services to your client. You may be a recruiter who's selling an opportunity to a candidate. You may be a manager who's selling a new process to your employees. You may be frontline staff who has a great idea to improve your company and you're selling it to your manager. Everybody today is in the business of influence, and we need to know how to work with others, clients, candidates, our bosses, our owners of our companies, the people on the front lines, and everybody in between. And Daniel's second big idea was that selling itself has changed more in the last 10 years than in the prior 100 years. And what he's talking about there is technology and the internet and the availability of information. Now, if you think about it, if you're anywhere over 30 years old, there was a time in your life when you went to buy a car and you had no idea what the dealer really paid or what the incentives the manufacturer was offering. Today, you can walk in with a printed copy of the invoice the dealer paid for the car. You know a detailed list of all the manufacturer incentives, and you can sit down and negotiate to the level of how much am I willing to pay over this invoice for this car. And the dealer can likewise say, I can give you full transparency. They also give you full reality about what we will and won't do. So because of that availability of information, we need to think about how to use that to our advantage. So when you're selling, and you'll see this in the next slide, there are ways you want to bring information to people to facilitate the buying process. And if you're still thinking old school, like, hey, I've got to hide my markups, I don't want people to see what we're paying. Well, the clients are going to find out. The candidates are going to find out. We want them to use the information, not to beat us up in negotiations, but to show them where they need to pay for the value you're delivering. And if they want a lower bill rate, then you can say, hey, what things should we be taking out of our services, because that's the only way for us to accomplish your bill rate goals. So the next point that Daniel made was talking about the ABCs of selling. And so if you ever watched the classic movie Glengarry Glen Ross, you saw Alec Baldwin talking about the old school ABCs. A, always. B, C, closing. Always be closing. And I know there are still staffing managers who teach that always be closing. And what Daniel said is that is so archaic that all that does is put buyers, prospects on the defensive and make them not want to work with us. Instead, you need to think about the new ABCs of selling. So the first A is attunement. And attunement really means creating alignment between yourself and your client. How do you get out of your own head and to see the world from the perspective of your customer? Really understand what they think, what they feel, how they're motivated, how they're managed, how they're incentivized in their job. Until you have attunement in your views, it's really hard for you to sell a service where you have mutual benefit. You don't want the old school, salesman win, customer loses. You want the new school, we maximize the value of the transaction by making it work to deliver goals for everyone. Give you a quick example. I saw a sales trainer many years ago. He sold equipment for IBM, and he said, I had a huge competitive disadvantage. I had the slowest equipment, I had the most out-of-date technology, and I had the biggest, clunkiest piece of hardware. And he said, I went into a prospect not knowing how to sell my value against the competition, and I had this customer who really wanted my product. He said, in all good conscience, I couldn't think of a reason this customer would want to buy my product, and I told the customer why the competitor's product was better. And the customer said, you know what, I understand the technical value of your competitor's product. Practical value is yours is the heaviest, and it's the only one that I can put in the floor that holds the door open. So this sales trainer said that was an aha to him, and that value, the attunement that's created, really depends on how your customer sees the world. And sometimes people want the sexy new technology, they want the online staffing. Sometimes they want the high-touch service. You need to see the world through your customer's eyes to deliver the value they want. The second thing is buoyancy. If you're in selling, whether it's internal selling or external selling, you're going to live in a sea of rejection. You're going to hear no all the time. Really good salespeople are trained to see every no is one step closer to a yes. But for the rest of us, no's hurt. We don't like them. So we have to learn, have to be trained, have to practice dealing with them, and that they're not the end of the world. It just means it was no to that particular relationship, that transaction at that time. I'm sure everybody listening has had the situation. I know I've had it many times. Customer says no to you. They go and do something else. 3 months, 6 months, 3 years later, they're back saying, you know what? I really liked working with you. You weren't pushy. You had great ideas. What we tried didn't go exactly as we expected. Now we want to work with you. So you need to stay buoyant. You need to maintain relationships with the clients so that you're not getting weighed down, you're not giving up, and that you're nurturing these relationships over the long term. And then finally, the last part of the ABC is clarity. You want to make the selling process more transparent. Your expertise comes from helping others to really understand how to buy staffing, selling that value, making sure you're getting people all the information they need. The information, not just about what's our bill rate, what's our markup, but what's the value proposition? How are we increasing productivity? What's the difference between having 10% no-shows and 0% no-shows? What's the difference between having a highly productive worker and an average worker? The more information you can gather and assimilate for your clients, the more clarity you can give them, the easier it is for them to buy. You're also helping your client to validate that their beliefs are true, and you're curating facts, relevant facts that they need to make buying decisions. What Daniel said is that in today, selling isn't about problem solving, it's about problem finding and helping clients who are overworked, overstressed to identify beyond the I need a temp, what's the real business problem going on in the organization and what's the best way to solve it. And that all business to business sales today really is a form of management consulting, and I love that definition. And then finally, Daniel talked about 4 take-homes. So he talked about how to work with people when you're trying to influence or sell or persuade. So if you're a manager, you're an owner, and you're trying to persuade people who are subordinates, you come from a position of power. And if you think that you're persuading from a position of power, you're making a huge mistake. Power leads us to anchor our beliefs really heavily in what we think. And so what we need to do is see things from the other person's vantage point, get in attunement with how they see it, give away the power. Let the other person be in power, let the subordinate be in power by being how they want to make the decisions, so that when we give away the power, they're much more likely to listen to our ideas, evaluate ideas, and embrace our ideas than when we're just telling them what we want them to do. When we use too much power, we make other people feel powerless. That creates stress, that creates resistance, that doesn't create a good team. Likewise, when we're going up, now it's not about power. We're going to someone who has more natural authority over us, who has power. So we need to think about what the other person is thinking and feeling. How do they view the situation? Again, it's that attunement. So if I can get inside the head of my manager, the business owner, and I'm presenting an idea and I can show the alignment of the idea to how they see the world, they're much more likely to agree with, adapt, and champion the idea that I'm bringing to them. Daniel's next point was that who do you think is better at sales, an introvert or an extrovert? Now, we've all taken that Myers-Briggs test, and some of us are at one end of the scale or the other, or somewhere in the middle. And what was really fascinating is Daniel showed a graph that said it's actually neither. Someone who's a very strong introvert, no surprise, they're terrible at sales. But what's sort of surprising is someone who's a really strong extrovert is also terrible at sales because they never listen. And what Daniel said is the absolute best, the most successful people are, and I got to read this word carefully, ambiverts. Those are people essentially who can go back and forth. When they need to listen, they act like an introvert. They let other people talk. They let other people explain. They process what's being said. When they need to motivate, when they need to educate, they become extroverts. They're not afraid to explain, to talk, to get out of their comfort zone. And so the people who can go back and forth generate dramatically more closed sales than people who are at one end of the spectrum or the other. So you might want to look at your hiring process for salespeople and recruiters and say, are we screening for people who are capable of being ambiverts? And then lastly, if you want to motivate behavior, try to be as specific as you can and make action easy. So if I want someone to buy staffing from me, let's be specific about what I'm selling and make the ordering process as easy as possible. I love thinking of the old Staples commercial with an easy button. I want it to be as simple as I have a problem, hit the button, solution's there. So how can you make buying staffing easier? How can you be more specific to the problem that you're trying to solve, whether that's just a talent problem or it's a business deliverable problem? We're trying to find the best ways to get people to solve their problems and make it as easy as possible for them to take action. And with that, we're going to turn it over to Ryan, who's going to talk to us about the next keynote on the fourth age.
Great, thank you, David. Yep, this one was Byron Reese, the keynote, Smart Robots, Conscious Computers, and the Jobs of Tomorrow. And as the presentation title suggests, the fourth age, we've already been through three major changes in history driven by technology. 100,000 years ago, humans developed language. That was a game changer, and it coincided with the discovery of fire. Cooking food provided more energy to grow larger brains, and we were off to the races. Then 10,000 years ago was agriculture, which led to the division of labor and the creation of cities. People began specializing their work as they contributed to the city-state. Then 5,000 years ago, history officially began with the invention of writing. This coincided with the wheel and the development of transportation. And you might be thinking that those three examples, particularly language and writing, they don't really fit our conception of what technology is. But Byron defines technology as the tricks we learn to multiply the results of what we do. And by that definition, these tricks we learned were tremendous leaps forward. So humanity's next big trick, ushering in the fourth age, will be driven by AI and robotics. And I want to share a clarification that Byron makes here around what AI is and what people understand it to mean, because I think there's way too much confusion over the term, and the differentiation he offered can really be helpful up front here. So narrow AI, that's what we've got today. When you feed a computer a bazillion historical examples and it gets amazingly good at making future predictions by recognizing the patterns. Recruiting chatbots do this. Translation programs do this. Even self-driving cars do this. They're being shown over and over again what a deer a half mile away looks like, or what the probability of a crash is based on driver behavior. Then there's artificial general intelligence. And that's what people think of mostly. You think of science fiction examples like Skynet, or any computer that starts thinking of its own volition. And even the possibility of this is based on one big assumption. That assumption is that the brain is a machine, and therefore our mind is a machine. And then it's just a matter of time before a machine that can do all the processing power that we do comes online. And that's a big assumption, that we're effectively machines. And even if that turns out to be true, Byron said that fewer than 10 people are actually working on this, and no one knows how to do it yet. Okay, so the big fear is that technology will displace jobs. And that's absolutely true. But Byron illustrated that throughout history, most jobs only have a shelf life of 50 years anyhow. So all of the elevator operators from years past, or telephone operators, or more recently travel agents, they were going to be displaced anyhow. Very often, new technology drives a greater need. Case in point is Google Translate. I really like this example. It's easy to envision this awesome software eliminating the need for human translators. But in fact, the opposite is true. The email translation that it affords, that opens the doors to foreign markets. And then when it comes time to hash out contracts and hold meetings, the human translators are in much higher demand. So where can automation and AI play a role in today's work? AI is possible, automation is possible, when two people can do the same job, when it takes less than a second of decision time by the human, and it's repetitive work. And Byron also did a great job of illustrating that technology displaces the most dehumanizing jobs. So to the next slide here, this really showcases this and what David was referring to earlier. Technology primarily creates high-paying jobs, for example, geneticists. And it displaces those dehumanizing jobs, the low-skill, repetitive manual labor roles where humans behave like machines. People often worry that the fast food worker can't become a geneticist. But as illustrated here, that's the wrong concern to have. The college biology professor moves up the rung to become a geneticist. Then the high school teacher gets the professor's role. Then the substitute teacher gets the full-time high school role, and so on all the way down. So the real question becomes, can everyone do a job that's just a little harder than the job they have today? And if the answer is yes, then everyone gets a promotion. So the good news for staffing is that the labor market should be very fluid, lots of opportunity, and although it will continue to be more challenging to truly stand out, if you specialize in a niche with a proven ability to assess ability and find talent, you'll be a trusted guide in that space. Lastly here, Byron offers three main considerations when evaluating whether to invest in a technology. One, don't burn bridges. And that means don't plunge into anything where if it goes wrong, you can't revert back to where you were. Number two, look for a 10x return on your investment. The pain of transformation requires a significant advance. If it's incremental, it's just not going to be worth the trouble. And lastly, there is no big anything, no big X, meaning don't buy into the hype you hear about having to invest in one revolutionary technology, say, for example, blockchain, because that simply isn't the case. With that, David, I believe you're up next with Alan's pretty interesting economic graphs of doom to share with us.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, that's a perfect way to describe it. So Alan Bailu is the president of RTR Economics, a company that has done amazingly well at forecasting ups and downs in the U.S. and global economy. I didn't share Alan's stats on his track record, but it was something like 99.7% of the time their predictions were right. Of course, he's an economist and they make up numbers, so he probably made up that one too. But the presentation was what everybody wanted to know: when's the downturn happening? Now, before he got into the economic data, he put up the slide you see, which had, I thought this was fascinating. This was states in the United States, their gross domestic product ranked versus the world gross domestic product. So you can see at the bottom middle, Texas. Texas, if it was a country, would be the 10th largest country on the planet. Even the smallest one on the map, Vermont, at 99, is the 99th largest economy on the planet. So the United States, which collectively is the largest economy on the planet, there are lots of individual states that are global forces in terms of economic power. And this really doesn't affect when the recession will occur, but I thought it was really fascinating. You can look at where your state is and see how big an impact do we have in the world. But now we're going to get to what Alan spent most of his time talking about, and that was data. And Alan had data. And Alan really liked charts. I think if you're an economist, there was a rule, you have to have as many charts as possible. So I'm not going to even try to explain all of Alan's charts, but I'm going to kind of explain some of the highlights of what I took out of the presentation. So the next recession, what's good, what's bad? This stat I was happy to hear about. Manufacturing in the United States is growing. And in fact, right now we are just shy of record levels of manufacturing in the U.S. Also, despite what you might see in the evening news, our exports are at a record high from where they have ever been. But it's not all good news. Right now, growth is slowing, and his first prediction was you should expect to see a mild recession as early as the end of this year or early next year. What's this going to be caused by? What are some of the challenges? Well, our exports, even though they're high, are slowing down. Our trade imbalance with the rest of the world is at record levels and still growing. China, we've seen in the news with our battle over tariffs, they're feeling a lot of pain as well. And Alan's view is they're feeling more pain than we are feeling, but that may come back to haunt us. The tax cuts that we saw in 2018, he was hoping may provide a temporary boost to the economy, but they're really not going to have much long-term impact. Our government deficit is increasing. Capital investment by U.S. companies is declining. Housing starts have dropped, and retail sales have slowed. So there's a lot of things that are pointing towards a recession. The good news is it's not that bad, and there's going to be some ups and downs throughout the 2020s, and those aren't going to be that bad. And then he put up this chart. And we'll skip the area that says Great Depression for a section. We'll cover that because that's Alan's doomsday forecast. But let's look at the Roaring 20s. So you're going to see Alan's forecast at a drop between 21 and then it bounces back mid-22. So that's a recession. That's, Alan said, he compared, he said, that's nowhere near what we had in 2009. It's not even as big a drop as we had in 2001, but it will be a recession. The industry will contract. It will impact the labor markets. Staffing will feel it disproportionately because it will affect the temporary labor markets. So we need to be ready in just a year for seeing a slowdown and make sure our business is ready in just a year. And then in the 2020s, he said there's going to be a total of 3 recessions. But as you can see, they're relatively minor, and the entire upward trend for a decade is up. So this is a good time to be in staffing. It's going to be a little more of a roller coaster than it's been the last 10 years, but you really want to be in the staffing industry between 2019 and 2029 and a half. Then comes the end of the world, according to Alan. And, hopefully, most economists have trouble with what's happening next week, much less 11 years from now. But what Alan said is there's some significant headwinds, almost unbeatable, that we are going to be facing. Number one, demographics. The baby boomers retiring, taking cash out of the government because of their Social Security, their Medicare distributions, the ultimate insolvency of both Medicare and Social Security, exploding healthcare costs as we have to take care of the baby boomers and their need for medical coverage, the continued growth in the United States of entitlement programs. We are going to see, according to Alan, inflation come back to more normal levels, which means that instead of being able to get a mortgage for 3 and 4%, it's going to go back to being 7 or 8%, where it was not so long ago. And then the U.S. national debt. He said what happens is in 2030, all of these things converge to cause what he has described as the second Great Depression. He actually said this one's worse than the one in the 1930s. So what do? Well, one, you can hope that there's lots of things that we can't be forecasting 11 years out that will make a difference, but sort of like the who moved my cheese analogy from earlier, now's the time to start protecting your company. Focus on the segments of your business that are the most profitable and continue to grow those. Look at all of these technologies to automate and improve efficiency so that you can handle more capacity without opening more branch offices or without having to hire more people. Make sure you're managing cash really well so that you're not using a lot of debt. You're not upside down in your ability to finance payroll. Then he talked about kind of a terrible analogy, but he said, kill the basset hound. In all these businesses, we have these cute, lovable projects and lovable expenses that we keep around because we like them. He said, now's the time to get rid of them. Develop talent. Make sure you're upskilling your internal people so that they are better consultants, better at dealing with clients and candidates. They are able to handle more capacity, deliver more value for your clients, because ultimately that's why they pay you. He also suggested, and a lot of the graphs that I quickly flipped past, we're looking at rates of change. So how fast are we going up or down in the staffing industry, in new hiring starts, and unemployment rates? And he said by learning to monitor rates of change, you can actually see when the inflection points will occur, so you know there's going to be a recession or a depression before it happens. Personal advice that we've seen in working with staffing companies through downturns in the early 2000s and in the Great Recession, now is the time to get more aggressive about your client relationships. We saw the clients of ours that got really aggressive in 2008 and 2009 about deepening client relationships, even when those clients weren't placing orders, were the companies that bounced back fastest, bounced back strongest, and have grown the most in the last 10 years. Diversify your client base. If you are client-centric, very heavy in 1 or 2 or 3 or half a dozen clients, then you want to make sure that you are doing everything possible to broaden the number of clients that you represent so that the loss of any one client will not negatively impact your business too much. And you're going to think this is self-serving, but it works. Now's the time to look at your marketing programs and make sure that your voice is strong in the real world, supporting your sales team, in the virtual world, online, social media, email, everywhere people can see you, they should be seeing you. And even when things slow down, they should be seeing you even more, because when companies pull back on their visibility, on their sales and their marketing, their clients think they're in trouble and they switch their business to other companies. The companies that continue to invest, even when it's painful, far outpace their competitors. Also now, one of Alan's recommendations is time to protect yourself and protect your kids. Stockpile savings as much as you can. Teach your kids, live below your means. I know it's fun. I've got kids who are just getting out of college and college age, and first thing they want to do is new car. They want to go with a new job. They want to be in a great new apartment. Well, a lot of kids are realizing it makes sense to live with mom and dad a while longer. Do things to live below your means, to stockpile money, so when that downturn hits in their mid-career, they're going to be able to financially get through it. If your kids can afford it, or if you're in the point where you can buy a new house, now's the time to buy, because you're never going to see interest rates as low as they are today. And in the future, when inflation goes up, it's a lot better to be paying off your loan with dollars that have been inflated or are now worth more. When interest rates skyrocket, Alan's advice was to get into bonds and lock into longer-term bonds when interest rates hit north of 10%. And for some reason that he did not explain, he recommends you look at bonds from the country of Australia, but he said they will be very secure. He also said mid-recession, go more into cash, and then as the inflection point hits at the bottom, because you've watched those trends, then buy equities, because if you look at that 2033 up to 2037, a lot of millionaires and billionaires will be made, even though the overall economy is still part of this Great Depression. My question in looking at this was, do you have the guts to take action before the bad news happens, or do you have the regret if you didn't? So lots of interesting challenge we'll face. We're going to kind of now jump fast forward. Those were the keynotes. We're going to now go into the breakout sessions, pick up the pace a little bit, and talk about some of the many, many breakouts we saw. And I think we were counting, we went to maybe 1/3, maybe less of the breakouts. There were so many amazing presentations. So again, my second pitch for SIA is sign up for Miami, because we can't do justice to what we saw in the next 20 to 30 minutes, but we're going to do our best. So one of the ones I went to was a sector focus on industrial staffing. A couple of panelists from PeopleReady, Winolo, and Malone Workforce Solutions were sharing some of what they're seeing. PeopleReady, big international staffing company, they've jumped into the online staffing world with a program called JobStack that they're using to supplement their branches. They're integrating their online staffing with their brick and mortar to cater to the preferences of the workforce. Their younger workers tend to like to find out about jobs and apply via the app. The older workers like it the old way. But what they're finding is the combination of technology and human is radically improving branch profitability. They're actually decreasing the number of branch offices, but increasing their profits, because every branch that remains through automation, through online staffing, is becoming so much more profitable. Malone Solutions also is making big investments in technology. Some of the platforms they were looking at, eRecruit, PhenomenPeople, TempBuddy, and RapidPay, they're making lots of investments in technology to improve service to candidates. They have a strong belief that best candidate wins, and the more they can do to streamline the search, apply, onboarding, payrolling, communication process with their candidates, the better. They're also making significant investments in training for their internal team, because they want their people to be better consultants, better career advisors, and really provide more value to their clients and candidates. And finally was Winolo, which is an online staffing company. They are trying to find more efficient ways to match workers to employment needs, using technology to source, match, and onboard workers. They are the W-2 employer, unlike other gig economy companies where it's all 1099. Their data is pretty amazing. They have a 90% fill rate on job orders within 3 hours. They give full transparency to the employer and the job seeker about the work and the performance, essentially those star ratings, not just of the candidate and the candidate's work, but also the employer. So good temps accept jobs from good companies, and good companies are able to hire good temps. Their recruiting is done heavily via social media and lots of testing in their advertising to see what ads draw traffic, not by recruiters digging into resume databases and calling people. And this is the stat that made everybody's jaw drop. Their no-show rate on assignments is 2%. Again, folks, this is light industrial staffing, but they are providing workers almost like day labor, where they assign people to the work assignment day after day after day, which is part of the reason that their no-show rate is so low, is because somebody accepts an assignment, like an Uber driver offering to pick you up. They go to the assignment, they go do the work, and that's the end of the assignment at the end of the day. There was a lot of questioning on the panel about, well, what happens for a longer term assignment, and do clients really like replacing the workers every single day? The guy from Monolo, of course, said yes. Everybody else said, yeah, I don't think so. So interesting debate, but definitely a company to check out if you're in industrial staffing. All right, Paula, let's talk a little bit about our next session.
Well, happy to do that, David. Thank you. This session talked about the collaboration and the struggles between the sales and marketing functions. And they addressed head-on that in today's fast-paced, digital, mobile-connected environment, it's going to really be critical to have a sales and marketing alignment. So what I want to do is kind of set the stage. Now, we all know that salespeople still refer to marketing people as those back office, administrative, cost centers. They lack that sense of urgency. And then the marketing people refer to the salespeople as the renegades, the road warrior entertainers, who overpromise and underdeliver. And so according to a stat they provided through the Harvard Business Review, when the sales and marketing functions work together, companies will see a substantial improvement on important performance metrics. And that's where the sales cycles are shorter, market entry costs go down, and then the cost of sales is lower. Now, the salespeople in this panel, which comprise of Chandra from Nelson and Eric from Upwork, stress that they employ a very high-touch sales approach that centers around 4 main pillars. And those pillars are lead generation, candidate engagement, social engagement, and then the automation of marketing tools. While the marketing people on the panel, who were comprised of Chrissy from Nelson and Rich from Upwork, emphasized that their marketing focus, which is highly measured by revenue growth, enables their teams to be successful and grow accounts. And centering around PR, leveraging technology, offsite strategy means that they say is a must that they have every single year, and they create a defined process. However, even with the importance of sales and marketing teams working together towards common goals, the reality is that tension still exists amongst them. And I think none of the panel members offered a surefire way to get past that. So we didn't have an answer, and I guess we'll always be working on that. So why don't you introduce the next session, Ryan?
Absolutely. Thanks, Paula. So the session I attended was Eric from Texas, Senior VP of Sales, presenting on 2019 State of Staffing, how fast growth staffing firms recruit smarter. And the biggest thing is how they communicate differently. So fast growth firms compared to slow growth firms communicate in real time. He shared a couple of studies that I appreciated. Studies show 64% of customers do not want to wait on hold. They want real-time communication. And the HubSpot report last year said that you're 9 times more likely to convert a prospect if you respond within 5 minutes of their inquiry. So that's essentially real time. He gave response rates here for communication methods. So email, 3%, phone, 5%, text, 40%. Not surprising, being shared by a texting platform, but really compelling numbers here. And average response time is much different. The average response to an email, it took 90 minutes. The average time to respond to a text was 90 seconds. It's important to note here that texting supplements other communication. And Eric was good to point that out. He said, do not text out, here are all our open jobs. That will not drive a 40% response rate unless the response you're looking for is unsubscribe. A supplemental text might be something more like, hey, I just left you a voicemail regarding this opportunity. Please text me back here if you'd like to learn more. Those are successful. And case studies, which I love, they did a really good one with Etain, and Etain did a 60-day pilot with 80 of their recruiters. So 40 of the recruiters just made calls from their cell phones, and the other 40 used text. So those who used text reduced their time to submittal by half a day on average, and they made on average 1 additional placement per week. So tons of ROI there. And that transitions well into the next session I attended. It was in the same room just an hour later, and that was Sarah Beth Marapat, the marketing director from LeoForce, did a really compelling presentation here. She started with an overview of today's landscape, the title of this being Blending Human and AI-Driven Candidate Communication. And the first stat time to fill has doubled since 2010. That's a really glaring number because we know it's a problem in the industry. Job seekers are spending far less time in the market searching with this record low unemployment. And if you have a slow process, you'll lose them. They've got more options available. They'll go elsewhere if the steps are too slow or too burdensome. She also talked about the change in consumer communication demands. So just following from the last presentation, speed is the new normal. Waiting more than 12 hours to reply to an email has become unacceptable. The customer feels ignored when they wait any longer for a reply. And perhaps the most important stat I heard all week, I wanted to bold it here, was that 60% of candidates, when they're asked what the biggest thing, what the biggest improvement can be done to improve the process of recruiting, they've said communication. That was heads and shoulders above any other concern. Just to harp on this point for a minute, in this highly competitive market where talent has more options, they're spending less time searching, and they expect a quicker turnaround, there's obviously a tremendous disconnect with time to fill doubling for the average staffing firm and 60% of candidates saying that communication was a problem in the process. Here at Haley Marketing, we talk about one of the 4 pillars of recruitment marketing being what we call the employee value proposition, or EVP. If your firm can solve this problem of communication, your value proposition to the talent is incredibly strong. Strong and timely communication is an exceptional differentiator in today's world. When Leo Force surveyed recruiters and candidates on communication methods, they found the following. Most used by recruiters, 81% of them LinkedIn connection or InMail, 14% email, and 5% phone. The most preferred by candidates, 20% said LinkedIn, 79% said email, 39% said phone. And then the actual response rate, 35% LinkedIn, 31% email, 44% phone. So that was interesting, the difference there between perception and reality. So, we know speed matters, but on the next slide here, we want to talk about how recruiting, it is a human endeavor. So we want to look at what it is to marry the two. And Sarah talked about that. The typical engagement that leverages automation starts leveraging the tools at the application or the screening stage. But you can see here, it goes from advertising to application to screening to interviewing to onboarding. At that application stage, you want to make sure your job board or career site has a mobile-friendly one-click apply. But this is also where you can leverage a chatbot to engage candidates in real time, or perhaps answer common questions that help them know whether to move forward with the application. Chatbots can also be useful at the screening stage, vetting everything from experience to commute preferences, and questionnaires and tests can automatically be deployed here as well. Then at the interview stage, recorded video can speed up communications and time to fill. And lastly, during the onboarding process, automated messaging can reduce no-show rates, and chatbots can answer common questions of new hires. So where does engagement typically fall short? Well, we've definitely seen it fail at the application stage with some horrible online applications out there. So you'll want to address any loss you're seeing there first and foremost. But then there's the black hole syndrome that the candidates who apply most often complain about. They go days, weeks, maybe months without communication, and by that time they're forever gone to a competitor. I talked about this problem at a roundtable Thursday morning, and one gentleman said, well, you probably want a certain percentage of your candidates going into that black hole, right? Well, it's true, of course, there are many unplaceable candidates you don't want to waste your time on, but consider the fact that many candidates who are silver medalists of today are going to be the placements of tomorrow. And you have an interest in reducing the negative online reviews you get from those candidates who are truly unplaceable, so your service still matters to your bottom line. And Sarah shared the following statistics. When candidates have a bad experience, 65% say they'll leave a negative review, 42% will never work with you again, and 22% will go the extra mile and warn friends and family not to use you. So, their solution, Leo Force, has Aria, their AI product, that's all built around increasing engagement and personalizing the process by marrying AI and the human touch from recruiters. There's quite a few solutions out there that do that, but I know we're short on time. Just want to share that Sarah did a great job of making the case for this kind of tool being a branding tool for staffing firms. Firms that are already using this are getting higher net promoter scores. So the idea that automation is creating a cold, disconnected experience does not match the result that firms are seeing in their client and candidate satisfaction. So bottom line, solving the candidate's greatest problem is going to be a strategic part of every staffing firm's success going forward. And on to the next one here. Again, we'll go through these quickly. Psychology of employer branding. This is presented by Jeffrey McCarthy from LinkedIn. 95% of decisions are made unconsciously. So I didn't have to consciously choose the bacon and eggs I put on my plate that morning. I just know I like those. They're on my plate. And, Freud, he pointed out, was quoted saying, words have magical power. It was actually his nephew, Edward Bernays, who applied that knowledge and became known as the father of public relations. He used words and branding to tap into consumers' unconscious, and he declared that people are rarely aware of the real reasons that motivate their actions. So staying on the academic track, Jeffrey gave us a closer look at the human mind and how it works. So first, you've got your primal or reptilian brain. That's where our innate self-preservation and survival instincts reside. So we can think of that as being where the first impressions and gut feelings are made. Then there's the limbic brain. That includes the amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain. So that's where empathy and feelings can be driven by trusted reviews, especially word of mouth, social media, and anything that can help a candidate understand what it would actually be like working for you, how that would feel. And lastly, you've got the neocortex that employs logic and reason. Questions like, is this good for my career path? Appropriate salary, benefits, am I willing to commute, etc. So skipping ahead, the reptilian brain, you're thinking about ways to make a strong first impression. More often than not, that's going to be your company website or the career site that talent typically comes across first. For the limbic system, your opportunity to connect here is often showing how you interact with others. So that's how you handle positive and negative reviews alike on social and any social interactions you have with your audience. Your audience can feel empathy when you show empathy towards others. You gave Maximum Healthcare Services an example. They've got a great video that gives a walkthrough of what it's actually like to work there. Lastly, the neocortex, your job postings are going to be most important here. And this goes beyond the basic descriptions we often see. When candidates were asked what content they found most valuable in understanding the role, they included salary and benefits, but also what a successful candidate profile looks like and what a day in the life looks like as well. So the key takeaways for employer branding here were to focus on a strong first impression on your website, display empathy in your social interactions, and ensure you're providing the full picture of your job postings. And next up is on automation and stagnation.
Thanks, Ryan. And for everybody listening in, obviously we've gone over already our 1 hour time frame, but those of you who have been on our executive forum recaps know that there's almost no way to do the conference justice in just an hour. So we'll probably be on for, I would guess, about 20 minutes or more as we continue to go through our presentations. We are recording today's session, so totally understand if people have to drop off and get back to work. Our recordings are always available at lunchwithhaley.com. Now, that brings me to the presentation I sat in on automation or stagnation. And the panelists were talking about the technologies that are most important to their staffing businesses. And you can see on screen the list of them: cloud computing, the ability to facilitate remote work, remote recruiters, and in some cases, remote contractors. Integrating AI and machine learning to enhance speed to market. Some of the things Ryan was talking about with using chat as a way to provide 24/7 service and accelerate the candidate evaluation process. Then there's the big data and analytics. Companies, particularly the bigger companies, getting really good at looking at their past data, performance times, what's working, what's not working, to improve future decision making. We're seeing a lot of this even with smaller companies when we're helping to manage job advertising through programmatic advertising management to figure out which job boards are driving talent at the lowest cost per candidate. Then there's automation and RPA, or recruitment process automation, which is, and I think this is so cool, I've seen some staffing companies doing this, looking at all the manual repetitive tasks that you're doing the same low value added steps over and over and over again. And then you get a developer, a process automation expert, who can build software that repeats those steps the way a human would do it, so that now your recruiters, your salespeople, your back office people can be spending more time on higher value interaction with clients and candidates. And lastly, again, only the bigger companies, a lot of technology automation going into the globalization of their workforce and trying to leverage global talent to get things done. And one of the people on the panel talked about his sales teams in the United States. His development team is mostly in Europe. His customer support team is in the Philippines, because he's finding places to do the work where it's a combination of high quality and low cost. In terms of where to automate, SIA has their graphic, and you can sort of see it grayed out here, that shows the entire staffing universe and all the things that are part of the workforce solutions, or total work talent solutions, as they like to refer to it. And the chunk that's highlighted here is about talent acquisition technology. And I don't expect everybody to try to copy down all these notes, but just think through all of the steps that go into candidate discovery, engaging candidate, maintaining information about your candidates. Every one of those processes then can go further down to a potential use of technology, automation, AI, to enhance how you deliver service to your clients and candidates. I love the chart because it gets you thinking so many different places where your business can do what you're already doing today, but do it better, do it faster, do it less expensively. And then lastly, there were a couple of charts, and I only showed one here, talking about the use of automation by staffing firms in terms of client or candidate. And what you want to do, you don't have to try to copy this chart down, but think of all of the touch points you have with your clients or with your candidates. Define all of them, and then you look at which can be conducted by a human, which can be conducted by technology, which should be a hybrid. It's more efficient to automate, but some things can't be automated. So you see a lot of things on the right-hand side of the scale here are what a human should do. And the further you get out to that 100% are probably roles that are going to be difficult to automate, but anything that's in the middle or the left side are things you should be looking to process, automate today. And one final statistic from this panel, companies were asked what they spend on technology, and it was presented that Adecco's budget for technology in the year 2020 is 250 million euros. So we're not going to beat Adecco on their technology investment. We've got to think about where it makes sense to automate, because we can't stagnate if the big global competitors are doing other things. We just have to figure out where it makes sense for us to automate, where it makes sense for us to beat them on service. Paula, let's talk about this session.
Great, thanks, David. How to win and keep the best talent through 2020 and beyond. I was very pleased to see that we are going to get the perspective of a small executive search firm with Me Derby participating on this panel. They started out with the stat that the U.S. labor force average annual growth by decade is severely declining. In the 1950s, it was 1.1%. In the 1970s, it was 2.6%. In the 90s, it was 1.3%, followed by 2010 with 0.7%. The projection for 2030, that Great Depression era, is going to be at 0.3%. I mean, simply put, there are just more jobs than hires. The next key trend suggested that large clients will use more contingent workers. With a benchmark of 10% back in 2010, and 20% in 2018, the use of contingent workers is projected to rise to 25% of the workforce by 2028. The key trend number 3 stated that 56% of employers say the skills gap is a big problem, yet 96% of workers feel qualified or overqualified. 80% of employers expect 2 interviews and a max to hire, yet 54% of the best-in-class companies don't even accelerate the interviewing process. And then lastly, David alluded to this earlier, that their investment is going to be spent in technology solutions, such as texting, email, recruitment, chatbots, candidate engagement platforms. While they were discussing the candidate shortage, Pankaj Jindal, who's the co-founder of Sense, stated that 50% of candidates are already in your database. I don't know if you know that, but involuntary turnover can be as high as 25%, while 31% of contractors leave their assignment early. However, less than 50% of staffing firms measure contractor happiness. Did you also know that most staffing redeployment rates are under 5%? 41% of candidates who have a poor experience say they would look elsewhere. So the key takeaway that I took from this is that make sure you continue to build a plentiful talent community to win and keep talent and the best talent. David, would you want to tell us about the industry leaders peer into the future?
Yeah, this is always one of my favorite sessions, and it's where it's mostly big companies, but I love seeing what the big companies are doing and how they view the industry, because I think it provides a lot of ideas and direction for those of us who are in smaller businesses. So first up was Tom Bix from EmployBridge, and some of the things he was talking about was that the high demand and scarce supply isn't unique to any sector of the staffing industry. It's everywhere, and there's no end in sight to the demand for blue-collar workers. It's no longer just about high-skilled jobs. It's a shortage in all jobs. But if we're going to fill those gaps, Tom's point was we have to learn to communicate with our workforce the way they want us to communicate. And for a lot of the workforce, this means digital communication, even though we're in a relationship-built industry and we're used to talking to people. I found this next stat he shared fascinating. The lifespan of a candidate has shrunk from 2 to 3 days. So how do you get people hired and working that fast? We need to find ways to accelerate the assessment, interviewing, onboarding, and placement of talent. And if it's not down in the 1 to 2 day range, somebody else is going to be placing our candidates. Also, pay rates. Tom said that pay rates for his light industrial workers have been going up an average of 5.3% per year, which is huge. If your clients aren't seeing this trend, they can expect to see more of their jobs going unfilled. You want to get the data that shows the increases in rates so that you can then work with your clients on setting bill and pay rates, or even just bill rates, that make sense in order to attract talent. The other thing Tom talked about is, the clients who want the cheap rates, they're going to have higher turnover. They're going to have more absenteeism, and that is a productivity killer. The clients that win the biggest in blue-collar staffing are the ones that pay what it takes to get reliable talent. He also talked about automation and how it's definitely going to displace jobs, but that's going to need all of their clients and the new kinds of people, sort of reiterating those earlier presentation. And that the digital communication, while it's necessary, shouldn't displace human communication, but enhance it. Texting, email, voicemail, all go hand in hand with building relationships with the recruiter. And he talked about 35% of the workforce are millennials. They prefer to be digital, but we have to be a human behind being digital. AI, he sees that as a great tool for doing the initial matching of talent to jobs and allowing recruiters to do their job more efficiently, not replacing the recruiter. All three panelists talked about being over-branched, where the large branches are proving to be more effective than lots of small offices, and large operational hubs for recruiting and fulfillment replacing smaller recruiting centers. All the panelists were also asked about remote work, and it seems like there's some split feelings about it, but most were sort of resided to the fact that it's going to be part of our workforce. It's got to be part of the employment offering if they want to have the best internal talent. And the key to growth: focus, decide where you're going to be good and be good at it. Culture, build a culture that attracts the kind of people you want in your organization. And then client selection, say no to the clients that you shouldn't be doing business with and put more effort into the ones who are the right fit for your company. The next person on the panel was Artec, and they're in IT staffing, extremely optimistic about the future because demand for IT remains strong. This year's even better than the last 2 record years their organization has had. But unlike some of the other panelists who felt the necessity to helping train talent, they said, we're not in the talent business, we're in the staffing business. We help clients find people and work with them when the ideal candidates are not available. So they saw themselves as client-side consultants more than talent developers. They looked at technology as a tool to allow recruiters to spend more time recruiting by getting rid of the low-level sourcing, sort of repeating Tom's thought. Like the others, they are centralizing their branch operations to work on operational efficiency, but maintaining as many offices as they need in strategic locations to be close enough to their clients to be responsive to those clients. They restructured their IT business around niche skills and vertical markets in IT. So they're not trying to be all things to all people in IT. And that's something I see a lot of smaller IT staffing companies doing, is trying to just be general IT rather than developing desks that are experts in different facets of technology. Their remote version of approach to the world was sort of mixed, and they've had mixed results. They want remote workers on site at key clients, but they want more of their people in their offices because they see the benefit of team collaboration. And for our tech, the keys to growth are building management teams. When you're an entrepreneur, professionalizing your management gets you from $0 to $20 million. But then after that, you really have to focus on what you want to be as you become a more dominant regional, national, international player, because you can't take on everybody. So you have to decide what you're going to be and what you're not, and really focus. You're going to notice a lot of similar trends in these very large, successful companies not being all things to all people. And that was the biggest of the big on the panel, Adecco. So the advice from Adecco was make hay while the sun shines. This is the time to build your client base, strive to double the number of clients you serve. Focus on building relationships with the companies that are fast growing. Disrupt your business. Find ways to put in new technologies that cannibalize your existing sales, new lines of service, because if you don't do it, somebody else will. Dare to price, and she didn't put in there the word higher, but I'll add it, but be bold. When talent is hard to find, you should be getting a premium for your services. We need to be bold with clients. Some clients will walk away, but you couldn't fill their orders anyway. Focus on the clients where you can fill the orders. Like Ryan mentioned in the prior presentation, responsiveness is critical to talent 24/7. It means chatbots, automation, systems that drive immediate communication. I love this comment. Bad clients hurt your company brand, because when you try to fill the orders, you don't provide great service to them because they're bad clients. Candidates have a bad experience. Candidates negatively talk about you on social media. So get rid of the bad clients. Let them be somebody else's problem. For Adecco, the goal is to make work something that works for everybody. They're big into upskilling because they have a lot of light industrial workers who may be displaced by technology, and they are just acquired a business specifically to focus on upskilling. I also like the fact that they're using technology. Our bots do the work at night to source and screen candidates. The recruiters come in the morning and do the real recruiting. This was sort of scary, but the bots are getting a higher net promoter score than the humans. People like dealing with automation. It's not that they have to deal with your recruiters, but you want to blend the two together. So those that want automation, digital communication, as Tom said, they get it. Those that don't, you're prepared for it. Adecco, interestingly enough, felt they were overbranched, and they're trying to consolidate the number of branches and then using WeWork office spaces to let remote workers go have a physical place to work when they need to work. About 10% of their workforce is remote, and they're trying to give more people more flexibility to work where they want, because that's becoming a core benefit of attracting talent. And I loved one of their keys to growth was to hitch your wagons to the fast-growing companies. And they gave an example of a company where they had one temp in 1987. They nurtured and built that client relationship. It is now a $1 billion staffing client for Adecco today. And with that said, I think we're going to wrap this up with our last presentation, and a fitting one, Paula, about breaking through the barriers to growth.
Yes, I'm the barrier between this last session and the lessons learned, so I'll be quick on this. This session actually centered around how small and mid-sized staffing firms can break through their predictable barriers to growth, and then have the ability to build a sustainable staffing business. The workshop consisted of a panel of experts from small to mid-sized staffing firms. The companies represented were Delta Companies, Attain Group, Chartered Path, and Signature Consultants. And the founders of each of these companies openly discussed their barriers to growth and then how they built a sustainable business. So they have been there, they've done it, they shared their perspectives of practical solutions to the real problems of growing a business. As they discussed with the group, the most common traits they all shared as successful business owners to achieving success was emphasized that even though they were very different personalities, they shared these traits to grow their very successful businesses. And I won't name them, but they're on the screen there. And I'm going to end it, and we'll get on to the lessons learned. And I think I'm up first, actually. So What I took out of this was, first, let me start that it was a great experience, meeting new people, meeting with clients, attending sessions, and having endless opportunities to have great conversations. High hopes for 2019 was on the top of the list. People are very optimistic, and expectations for revenue, spending, and placements are all higher than they were heading into 2018. And then next, prioritization. Candidates are the top priority this year, with sourcing, candidate engagement at the forefront. Other notable top priorities included embracing digital transformation, brand development and marketing, social recruiting, and expanding into new markets. And then we can't forget automation. We all know automation is reality and it plays a huge role in future technology, but the words of one of the keynote speakers really stuck with me. They were, less than 1 second of human thought can be automated. However, more than 1 second of human thought cannot. So even though automation can provide an exceptional experience for the end user, there's going to be certain tasks that only humans will be able to facilitate now and in the future. And then lastly, polarity of perfection. No one is going to be the best at everything, so the ability to differentiate and define the niche that you can dominate is going to be paramount in the future. Ryan, you're up next.
Thanks, Paula. So sharing on some of that, the first one here, you have to have an employee value proposition. A lot of folks know what their value proposition is to clients, but they don't have a clear articulated one for the candidates. And with active job seekers spending less time in the market, more options available, and the passive job seekers as well, they all need to see a compelling reason to make a move. So if you don't know what your value proposition is to the candidate, if it can't be deduced from your messaging, you're going to find yourself at a serious competitive disadvantage against those who do. Second one, communication is a top recruiting differentiator. If 60% of candidates say the biggest problem they have in the process is communication, and your firm solves that problem, it can instantly become your greatest differentiation from your competitors. And lastly, you kind of hit on this, Paula, recruiting is always going to be a human endeavor. Automation will no doubt take over the rote, repetitive tasks that exist today in your business, but these tools are to enable recruiters to spend more time doing that which only humans can do. Automation can provide a superior experience on the front end, but then the recruiter needs to take it from there to ensure the match. And lastly, David?
Thanks, Ryan. All right, let's bring it home. So I want to repeat the point that I made from Barry's presentation. We're seeing an amazing amount of technology. I'm excited to be going to the Staffing Tech Conference in about a month to look at all of the new products, vendors, and ways staffing companies are using technology. But a lot of what we're seeing today is overhyped. It doesn't deliver the value the vendors are promising. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be investing in it, because that inflection point is going to happen. And then all of a sudden the technology is capable of delivering far more value than people even perceive. Those companies that understand the technology, that have practiced it, that know how to integrate it in their business, are going to have a distinct advantage over clients who are staffing companies that are trying to play catch up. So now is the time to, on a limited scale, experiment with these new technologies, integrate them into your business to see how they can help you build your employee value proposition, improve communication, enhance the service experience for clients and candidates. My next one is winter is coming. The people at Haley Marketing Group are probably sick of hearing me talk about the fact that a recession might come. A lot of the people here have never lived through, in the business sense, a downturn. I've been through 3. I know what they feel like. I know how painful they can be, and now is the time to prepare, or I so ineloquently put it, risk becoming roadkill. If you are prepared for a recession, it's not so hard to winter the storm. Now is the time to strengthen client relationships, diversify your client base, build a stronger marketing program, upskill your team, develop ideas and brainstorm ideas for new services, to look for new, more profitable niche markets that you can get into, so that you are ready for the 21-22 downturn, and then even get to the point where if Alan's right and it's the end of the world in 2030, you'll be ready to winter that storm too. And of course, for me, sleep is overrated. I'm sort of famous around Haley Marketing Group for never sleeping when we're at a conference, but honestly, it holds true at every conference. A lot of people, a lot of other vendors, they don't go to the sessions. They don't go to the receptions in the evenings. They don't go to the parties at night and mingle with their clients and prospective clients. And I had the most amazing conversations with people at strange hours of the night, because when you're casually talking to your customers, there's no sales pressure. I'm not trying to sell anything. We had great discussions about business, the future of staffing, and I increased my value as a vendor who can strategically partner with clients by having these opportunities to listen. So for yourself, if you're going to a conference, talk to your vendors. Go to a conference where you're the vendor, and make sure that you get out and talk with people in a non-sales situation to get a real strong view of the picture in their business. It's an unbeatable experience. And with that said, we have done it for another year of the Staffing Industry Executive Forum. If there are questions, you can submit them to us. We are way over time, as we always are with this recap. I want to say once again, next year's Executive Forum, please go to staffingindustry.com. It is going to be in Miami Beach, Florida. The venue is one they've had it at before. It's a phenomenal place. The content will be great. And we look forward to seeing you at the Executive Forum 2020. Oh, I can't even believe it's going to be 2020. And in terms of us, if you're with us later this month, we hope you'll join us. We're really excited. This month, we've expanded our pay-per-click advertising services, and we've got some great new service offerings that we will be doing a product demo of on Tuesday, March 19th. I hope you'll be able to join us. And for all of us at Haley Marketing Group, thank you so much for being part of today's webinar.